All right, my name's Justin.
My name's
You are.
James,
Yep. Yep.
and we're gonna give our take on some verses.
Some verses. Yeah. Going back and forth. No. No, but
Some
we're
scripts.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's gonna be some turns in this show. I think, and it might be fairly metered. I don't know. Probably not though, because we're doing Max Ritvo
We
today,
are
which is for those of you who don't know, a very, contemporary uh poet.
probably the most contemporary poet we've done.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've done a couple of poets that are still is it,
Oh well, maybe
we've
not.
done people who are still
No,
alive, right?
yeah,
Tracy K. Smith, she's still alive.
right,
K.
right. But
Ryan, K. Ryan is still alive.
we're. I guess I was thinking like when Tracy K. Smith put out her work, but it was in like 2020, wasn't it?
I mean, she was the poet laureate in I
Oh
think
yeah,
2019.
oh yeah, 2019, 2019.
Yeah.
And that's when outer. What was it called? Outer space.
Oh gosh, what was hers?
Life on Mars. Life on
Life on
Mars.
Mars. Yep,
Life
yep.
on Mars. But no, okay, so yeah,
It
we
might have
have
been
that.
2016 when that came out, or 2019, somewhere around there. One of
Okay,
those.
so
Yeah.
actually, not the most content. We've done poets who have released work,
Right, after,
since.
yeah, yeah. But he also, though, because of his age, 25 years old when he
Mm-hmm.
passed in 2016. So he's
Right,
a couple years older than us.
he is.
Um, he's really, we don't have too many people, born, you know, in the 90s, who have had an impact on poetry.
Right.
Max Ritvo might be, maybe the only one. I don't know if someone, I don't know like how old like Rupi Kaur is, she might,
Mm,
and I know
Ruby
I'm
Carr.
not,
Let's go.
she might
Let's
be a
get.
couple, she might even be late 80s. I'm not sure.
Oh no, she was actually born in '92, so around the same
Okay.
time as
Okay.
Max.
Yeah.
And Ritvo was born in '92 as well, I think, or
I think he was
'91
born
maybe.
in 90
Okay, in
or
'90.
not.
Okay,
Yeah.
Max Ritvo.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so these and so this is a poet from the night. This is our youngest poet, or like
Hmm.
this is the. I
Hmm.
guess this is their first poet born in the '90s, and you and I are both '90s babies.
Correct. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is one of our true contemporaries,
Right. Right. Yeah. No
who
longer.
who you mentioned has also passed away. May
Yes.
rest in peace.
Right. Right.
Untimely due to cancer.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So and what's also interesting is his cancer diagnosis and his subsequent chemotherapy
Hmm. Hmm.
has been a great influence on his poetry.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
As
Yeah. Yeah.
and and also his and I mean and his death has almost influenced his work just as much as his life.
Yeah, very much think, we did John Keats just a couple episodes ago,
Hmm.
and I very much think that Max Ritvo is sort of our generation's John Keats in many regards. A life taken, perhaps too young, due to illness, and someone who's, kind of going back, because I kind of I learned about him in like 2016, like shortly after he died, because of um or actually it was in 2017 because of this issue of poetry. It was actually my first one I ever got, and they did this whole feature on him in the back. That's how I learned of him. And he going back and reading it, sort of, because I also got his book, Form Reincarnations, and I had I kind of had mixed feelings, mixed emotions going back and reading his poetry. He's very like sort of imaginative, but it's sort of really his poetry is like, like John Keats, going back, kind of trying to bring this back full circle. his poetry is dripping with like potential. That's how I see it now. You know,
Mm,
it's full of potential.
okay.
Most of it unrealized. And I think
Mm,
that's the great appeal with John Keats. And so I think Max Ritvo, with what he's done, has has I would venture to guess likely sort of solidified him as a poet that will be read into the future, you know, and because of that great potential that his poetry suggests, you know, I think that's something that poetry really has great power in its, you know, power to suggest.
mm.
Um, so
Its
yeah,
power to sort of
that's
gesture towards
yes,
things.
yes, yeah.
It sort of reminds me of the poem of the death of the young athlete.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the name of it, but that's the gist.
Yeah.
Something like that. I can't
A.E.
remember who it's
Houseman.
by. A. Houseman, yeah, the athlete that died
Hmm.
young, and
Hmm. I think it
but
is the death of the young athlete. I think. Yeah.
it's something along those lines. And Ritvo is he also died young. His poetry does have a lot of potential in his poetry. It's very imaginative. He does a good job of illustrating sort of suffering, illustrating disorientation, illustrating weakness. Uh, I you know, and there are and there is a lot to like in his poetry. You can find like things to enjoy about his poetry. And I almost and you know I almost would hate to say that I wouldn't want to be so cynical as to say that some of his celebration is because he has passed away, or that it's easy to celebrate someone when they're dead. But I think Ritvo is he has a place in being like a younger contemporary poet who sort of had that great potential and was able to sort of reach beyond someone whom we've already mentioned, the Rupi Cars
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
sort of Tumblr era
Yeah.
poetry.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
You know,
I, yeah. I think that I think a lot of his appeal is because of his death. You know, his young sort of death, and that's not to necessarily take away from his poetry, but um, I think that, without that, not to say he would just be another poet, but I mean, it adds so kind of so much more, it really reminds me of, White Noise, which is a book, we both read, that,
Don
we
DeLillo.
both like quite a bit, but, through his death, he's sort of gained this sort of new, um, sort of wisdom or, sort of
Ethos.
prominence, ethos. He's sort of, he's sort of been catapulted in this upper echelon. Um, so I think that that plays a large part in it, in the appeal of it, and but that doesn't also at the same time saying that doesn't mean that it's not that it
It's
doesn't
not
take
worth.
away from it, but it it's
He is a
something.
worthwhile poet.
Hmm.
He
Hmm.
has written worthwhile poetry.
Hmm. Hmm.
But if the events of a poet's life can sort of color the perceptions of the poet, then I guess their death can color the perceptions of them as well. I don't see that seems completely logical to me.
I mean, it's true for I think people in general, for a lot of folks, the most important, part of their life is their death, and for many people, regardless of what they do, uh, that is true. Uh, Sometimes, our death is the most significant part of our lives.
Mm.
If not maybe the only significant thing, you know?
Hey,
You know,
it definitely happens.
right?
Something else. Max Ritvo is also a student of another poet that we've covered on the
Yes. Yeah.
podcast,
Yep.
Louise Glick.
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
um it's strange if Louise Glick is almost like this sort of feminine Diana figure of
Hmm. Hmm.
that can sort of this wise that has the wisdom to sort of illustrate cosmologies.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
Max Ritvo is almost like maybe like someone that's a priest in her temple,
Hmm.
who
Hmm.
maybe was sort of even
Or a
sacrifice, if I may,
devotee.
a devotee, if I make if I may go so as far as to draw that illusion. He seems to almost have sort of received even some of her good graces, and she passed recently as well. I think in
Yes.
she passed in 2020 or 2019, if I.
And I think actually just maybe even 2024, I think, or 2023 within
Okay.
the last year. Yeah.
So yeah, Louise Glick, and who I do actually I do really enjoy her poetry, but
Yeah.
she was a Max Ritvo was a student of hers, and so he's also sort of received some of her otherworldly charm as well.
Mm, hmm. Hmm.
So this is a
Yeah.
sort of a this is sort of a darling of the genre of the medium in some ways.
It is. Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
This is a darling of the media, Max Ritvo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Taken
Absolutely.
too soon,
Hmm.
worthwhile poet. But
Yeah. Louise Glick even she edited a book of letters between him and the playwright, and also a teacher of his, Sarah Rule,
mm,
who it was called the Final Voicemails. Um,
okay.
and so yeah, it's a book of their letters back and forth, and some poems. Uh,
Mm. So
so yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, she's very much involved. Like, Louis, he was a student of hers at Columbia. He his MFA there. So yeah, he's definitely a product of like the current like MFA like sort of
Class of poets,
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? So yeah, and I think
yeah,
he was actually began his MFA uh once he found out that his cancer had reemerged, if I remember reading that correctly. Um, and that decided him to go ahead and get his cancer came back during his undergrad, and that's what just made him decide to go get his master's in
yeah,
poetry.
yeah,
Which because he actually had been dealing with this throughout his life,
yeah,
but
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
it sort of surged back.
Right. Yeah, 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 yeah. He had it. He was first diagnosed, I think, when he was 16. Went into remission for some time, and then when he was in college, right, it came back, and
Yeah, it is a bat. It is a battle
soon
of cancer.
thereafter, yeah,
Cancer is
was
definitely a
terminal.
battle. It's definitely a
Yeah,
battle.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, sadly. But
but
hey,
we do have his poetry.
we do, and we have two poems that we're doing today.
We do.
Um, I can't remember if who went first or last
I
time. I
think. I
think
think it seems like it should be time for me to go first now.
okay, okay. I wasn't sure if I had gone first last time or not. But yeah.
But I'll go ahead and go first. The poem that I'm gonna do is actually I'm gonna read and analyze. It came out of the copy of poetry that Justin has, the 2017
Hmm.
copy of I think it's like the March, maybe something like that.
Hmm.
But it and the poem that I'm doing is coming out of there. It is called Your Voice in the Chemo Room. So, a bit somewhat self-explanatory title, but we will be delving into the meat and potatoes of it after I read it. So and it is it's a little too long to fit on one page, so I'll just have to scroll a bit. But I'm going to read Your Voice in the Chemo Room, Max Ritvo. There is a white stone cliff over a dropping slope sliced along with bare trees. In the center of the cliff is a round, dry fountain of polished stone. By seizing my whole body up as I clench my hand, I am able to open the fountain into a drain, revealing below it the sky, the trees, a brown and uncertain ground. This is how my heart works, you see. This is how love works. Have some sympathy for the great spasms with which I must open myself to love and close again and open. And if I leapt into the fountain, there is just no telling. I might sever myself clean or crack the gold bloom of my head, and I don't know onto what uncertain ground I might fold like a sack. Onto what uncertain ground I might fold like a sack. Okay, that is Your Voice in the Chemo Room by Max Ritvo. The poem is told mostly in couplets, and Ritvo writes a lot in couplets. Several of his poems are sort of in this sort of couplet style. Sometimes the couplet is one sentence. Sometimes it's broken up into a few sentences. Sometimes ending with a question. You know, this the poem Your Voice in the Chemo Room, there's almost something that's sort of difficult about it to analyze. There's something about it that's sort of hard to analyze because of its sort of just of some of the things that we outlined, just some of the nature of the poet and what the poet was going through when they were writing the poetry. I mean, in some things we sort of recognize that there are allusions to being in the hospital, looking out the window, and the pain that it might take to open a window or close a window, or even to get up and look around. And so this poem is it's sort of a it's sort of detailing something that the what the poet went through, and over the course of their illness as they were passing away from it. I don't know if you had anything just on the couplets or just the structure, Justin.
Actually, what sorry, what has gotten me is that the line, the I'm trying to find it up, the sky, the trees, a brown and uncertain ground.
Okay.
I was reading his book, Four Reincarnations. Here's the cover.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I don't know if you can.
okay, yeah, we can see it.
Yep. Um, I always take the cover jackets off. I realized that uncertain ground because he also had that in a line in a poem in this book. Because I read it and I was like, huh. Because I had just reread all the poems in that issue of poetry, the other day, and I was like, I read that and I was like, wait, did he double up some of the poems in this book and in that? But he didn't. So none of the poem, this is not in this book, but that line uncertain ground is, that kind of phrase. So like I'm trying to find it here because I want to bring it up because like
The
I've
sky, the
noticed a couple
trees, a brown and
things.
uncertain ground.
Yeah, brown and uncertain ground.
Mm,
So I
okay,
just
yeah.
find that you know,
Yeah, that is interesting. Maybe he has sort of like a bank of phrases that he will pull from. Um, something that I'd kind of like to illustrate is sort of like some of the like he has a lot of very tortured language. Painting a very tortured picture. By seizing my whole body up as I clench my hand, I am able to open the fountain into a drain, revealing below it the sky, the trees, a brown and uncertain ground. Has to almost seize to sort of lift his body up, and this sort of pain, this trauma is basically how his heart works. His heart is sort of working off of this rhythm, this back and forth, these spasms that he is feeling, the back and forth and the of this pain is like a pendulum, sort of like a pendulum. It leaves and returns, and a little bit of a push and pull.
That is, yeah, that's a good point about pain. You
Yeah.
know, with it, a lot with his poetry, it's almost like through the pain we kind of, I don't know, it almost seems like sometimes it feels like maybe we've reached something, and sometimes it feels like maybe we don't reach anything at all. And there's like almost like a disillusionment there, that there's no sort of really answer at the end of it all.
And it's interesting, when analyzing the poetry of a poet that is like so aware of his, the weakening of his body. It's interesting how, where, one may write poetry that explores, the outdoors or love or the past or, all these different things. But in a way, his there's other poetry that he has where his body almost becomes like a terrain, where like he almost has to like travel to his different body parts to get them to work. And almost like not recognizing, almost like not being able to sort of recognize himself through the chemo, and sort of you know um the different things that he's going through.
Yeah, sorry, I'm really trying to find this poem. Like, this is, oh, here we go. I found it. Crow says
Okay.
goodbye. A brown and uncertain ground.
Crow says goodbye.
Yeah, yeah. Here,
I'm gonna
so
let me see if I might I might have it here. No, let me
his,
see.
he has some of the same things. It's about, okay, let me read this to you.
Okay.
By seizing my whole body up. This is a stanza. This is the third stanza. By
Hmm.
seizing my whole body up as I clench my hand, I am able to open the fountain into a drain, revealing below it the sky, the trees, a brown and uncertain ground. In this poem, we're talking about some of the same things. We're talking about uh the cliff is a round, in the center of the cliff is a round, dry fountain of polished stone. By seizing my whole body up as I clench my hand, it's the same sentence. By seizing my whole body up as I clench my hand, I am able to open the fountain into a drain, revealing it below. The skies, the trees, a brown and uncertain ground. Here we go. Ooh,
What's next?
ooh. So he says in in the crow says goodbye, he says, by seizing my whole body up as I clench my hand, I am able to open the fountain into a drain, revealing below it the sky, the trees, a brown and uncertain ground. Okay. Next in Crow Says Goodbye. This is how my heart works, you see? This is how love works. Question mark. Have some sympathy for the great spasms with which I must open myself to love and close again and open.
Yes, it's reading the exact same.
Yeah, slightly different. But here he ends with, and if I leapt into the fountain, there is just no telling. I might sever myself clean or crack the gold bloom of my head, and I don't know what uncertain ground I might fold on like a sack.
Yeah, it ends the same way. So hey, I guess we live on the show. We just found that poem is the same. Crow says goodbye. Yeah, it's not quite the same, but it's very similar to your voice in the chemo room, which I just read.
Yeah, can you read that well enough?
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. I can see that it's the same. I can see that it's the same lines.
Yeah, but they're just, they're they're formatted a little bit differently. There's a little bit different wording in some places, but it's pretty much word for word the same.
Yeah, that's hey, who knew? That's interesting. Um
I
but
knew
yeah,
because that line at brown and uncertain ground, because both times I read it and I was like, it's uncertain about the ground.
mm, yeah,
That's what I kind
maybe
of wonder. What do you mean uncertain ground? What does that mean? I don't know. Brown and uncertain ground. The ground, how can the ground be uncertain? We're talking about the foundation? Are we talking about having the rug torn, pulled out from beneath you?
I don't know. It's brown and uncertain ground. I guess it's not as things are not always what they seem. I don't know. Maybe the ground. Maybe it's not the ground that's uncertain. Maybe he's sort of uncertain. Maybe he's uncertain about the ground.
Mm, I don't know.
You know,
Hmm.
I'm not exactly sure. You know,
Hey, that's interesting. Same thing.
yeah, it is. It's kind of
Hey,
strange.
but what a discovery,
It
Got
is earth
got a little
shattering.
got a little peek
Yeah,
into the craft,
I guess if you change the words, it is a different poem. So hey,
Hmm.
and
Well,
who knows what
yeah.
all was going on in the editing process of some of this stuff.
Yeah, and with this book though too, there's like some recurring characters and themes like with the crow and like with this guy Randall and things like that. So it then starts to fit into a some broader themes of the book that run through the book.
Mm,
So
okay.
so yeah,
Yeah,
I
but
mean
yeah, no, I don't know. Like I said, some of his poetry, it's not. There's not. I'm not gonna say there's not a lot beneath the surface, but I mean, it's.
right. I think with him being writing at the time that he was writing and being I mean, this is an Ivy League kid. He went to Columbia for his MFA, all that, blah, blah, blah. This is like a time when, being, opaque, it was in vogue, you know?
Mm,
So like being difficult to understand is like a badge of honor, These kids
mm,
don't want to be understood, you know? Uh,
I
we
hear you.
did not want to be understood. And so I think in some times in some regards. Like in his book of letters with Sarah Rule, writes about like, this poet that he did like this reading with, and he said like, oh, I didn't, made a comment to him like, I didn't get any of that. And they're like, well, I mean, it's the poem, my poem's not about anything. Like and
Mm,
that kind of like striking them, and so sometimes with some of his stuff like it's not as easy to like analyze as like some of the other stuff, like you don't get as much from it. You're like, oh yeah, this is like interesting writing, imaginative creative writing, but like I can't trace it back to anything,
yeah.
you know
How does it exist? It almost exists as like a almost like a what do you call it? Like these are almost like rough drafts or something.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's why a lot of it's like the potential, the great potential, and I think my poem will actually speak on that as well. But to a degree, I think like a lot of poetry and a lot of great poets and poems that come from people who are older, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think when you have someone maybe who's so young, and for many of us, of that age and Tumblr and Instagram and all that. We want to write things, that are, hard to understand. It's like when you read poetry and like it's difficult for you to understand it, you don't quite get all the allusions to it. And then so like you think, so it all kind of like things happen that seem sort of disjointed. And then so like, then you think like what it means to write poetry is to write things that are sort of difficult to understand that people can't quite understand, by first reading them because you yourself don't understand poetry when you read it. And like you think
Hey,
that's what
I
the true joy
mean,
is.
we can go over some of the poetry that I wrote in like 2014,
Exactly.
2015.
And and that's what I'm saying. My stuff looks like a worse version of this. And that's probably why I like Max Ritvo.
I don't know. I don't know if my stuff looks like a worse version of this.
I think he went to Columbia and he's a good writer and he had some of the same hangups that we had.
I wanted people to understand my poetry. I wrote so that they could understand
No, you didn't.
it. I had a poem that was just the whole the whole thing was that it was rhyming with Louise. Please,
I
Louise.
know.
Jeez, what's
No,
not to
I know.
understand? What's
I brought that up with the Louise Glick. We should have.
yeah,
Please, Louise.
but some people are very, very, very intelligent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's, maybe I missed. Maybe I don't know. I don't know about me, but hey,
Yeah.
hey, I'm ready. I'm ready when you are.
Yeah, let me
Let's.
pull this up. I'm like, where is this poem at? So I am doing um second, sorry, I gotta look this up.
We'll be marking pages from here on out. People will be, you
Don't
know, we'll be,
we're
we'll,
flying by the seat of our pants, it's fine.
yeah.
Okay, here we go. I like kept on like flipping right over it. I'm like, I thought it was right here. Okay, I am doing Heaven is Us Being a Flower Together. Folks, for you, those of you at home, I'm particular about reading it out of the book if I have it. I don't like to look at the screen. Trying to save my eyes.
Okay.
So Heaven is us being a flower together. Victoria, I think death comes at blindness. I think pupils are sails and death is when the wind goes slack. Winter, being so white, is trying to talk to me. Closing communicated to one who sees death as white worms riddling the apple of the eye. You think death comes at the cessation of touch. You are a flower bulb that can feel even in winter earth. The cold is a line that will not bend, drawn through you foot to head. Heat is a planet fleeing its own cold line. I have written this poem inside of you. I am clutched in with your mother blood, feeling your bends in the dark, becoming a soft bend in your body. We are becoming a bulb in the ground of the living, in the winter of being alive. So that is Heaven is Us Being a Flower Together. I think this is a great example of Max Ritbo, his in his style, his sort of unique style. It's very imaginative. There are many there are many sort of images and metaphors. Um, it's kind of dark. It's dealing with death. It's dealing with love. It sort of has this sort of cosmic, sort of point of view, and also kind of touching on, like Louise Glick, he's touching on flowers. We're touching on these things, that are also, of the earth, and sort of placing them in eternity or placing eternity in them in a way, you know. Um, and so, you know, Victoria's is his wife that he married. He did get married a year before he passed away. Um, and they're like longtime friends and before they, had a romantic relationship. I actually read an essay. I didn't finish it. Actually, I read half of it. It came in two parts. I read the first part of it. Uh, that was written by her. I think actually I thought about finishing it, and I thought actually it might be more fitting if I don't finish this essay on Max Ritvo. It was all about him and his sort of his imagination and how he sort of held imagination dear. Um, and you see this with this poem, right? So he's kind of going, kind of, and I think the real crux of this poem are the images, I think that's where,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of his poetry, where it really gets its, uh, why it has any merit, why it gets sort of any kind of praise is because of this sort of, the possibility of what these images, provide, because, stylistically, like, the what do you I don't know I don't know how you even categorize this, right? Like there's
I
a,
mean,
he's
you
not
have the
keeping any.
couplets. I mean,
There's
well,
yeah, there's
there's
sort of
some
couplets and
couplets, and there's some
I
standalone
mean,
lines.
one thing you can say is that other than, stanza 3 and 4 are the only two that are like sort of connected. All the others are uh end in a period, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
the second to last stanza is the only one that has two sentences in it.
Mm, okay.
And I think there might be something there, you know.
Okay.
It's not like this is, without structure, it's not thoughtless.
Right.
Um, saying it's all over the place, that's going too far. Um, but it almost doesn't feel totally fleshed out to me.
I mean, I get it, like being a flower together,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I mean, it's a beautiful image. But did he illustrate? I mean, was heaven illustrated?
So
I
I
don't.
think, yeah. I mean, in some ways, we're talking about, what our thoughts of sort of heaven are, of sort of this afterlife, of this eternity, even what our thoughts of death are. So he's saying, hey, I think death comes at blindness, sort of like this cessation of seeing, like no longer being able to see, you know. For her, it's the cessation of touch, the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's something there. Um, you are a flower bulb that can feel even in winter earth. She is still growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
She can still feel it even in winter earth, even in the coldest, even, you'd say it, the cold, hard, you know, rocky earth, during the winter, it feels even then, she's just waiting to bloom. Um, the cold is a line that will not bend, drawn through you foot to head, like there's something, you know, through that coldness, through that hardship that has sort of, hardened you within, that will keep you from sort of, bending to maybe sort of the ways of the world. Uh, heat is a planet fleeing its own cold line. Um, which I find interesting. Heat is a planet fleeing its old cold line, because it seems like it's something that she would need. Is heat the thing that she thinks that she would need? I don't know. To me, I'm almost like thinking of the image of a distant father. Is he a distant father figure?
Heat is a planet fleeing its own cold line. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a
I like
planet.
that. Yeah.
Maybe it's I don't know.
I like that line though of, I have written this poem inside of you. Um, thinking of, sort of, you think of, the life you live as being, your greatest art, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, him kind of, maybe his greatest poem is the one he wrote inside of his, wife, the impression that he made upon her. I am clutched in with your mother blood, feeling your bends in the dark, becoming a soft bend in your body. Again, that's where I feel like we kind of get into this weird kind of space. And maybe that's me being judgmental. I'm not sure. But I do like the ending with, we are becoming a bulb in the ground of the living in the winter of being alive. Um, that sort of, I guess that thought of
Mm.
maybe this, you kind of have this idea of this like kind of conjoined. And he wrote like letters to his wife after he passed, for her to read after he passed away about them sort of still being together, sort of in spirit,
Mm.
and him kind of capturing that idea with this image of them being a bulb in the winter ground that's just waiting to bloom. And, it kind of goes with some like sort of vague Christian ideas or even, vague sort of other ideas we have of the afterworld of it, you know, us, and he has poems about, this too, about, kind of being like a butterfly and, sort of us blooming in the afterlife.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, man. Hey, I definitely like some of the imagery, and I do like the we are becoming a bulb in the ground of the living in the winter of being alive.
But like, I don't get like, okay, I do have questions about winter being by being so white is trying to talk to me.
Closing communicated to one who sees death as white worms.
Before that, it says, I think pupils are sails. Like I can see that, and death
Mm-hmm.
is when the wind goes slack. He says, I think death comes at blindness, right? So I think pupils are sails, like these allow us to travel, and
Mm-hmm.
death is when the wind goes slack, when we can no longer see and travel, go out, because that's like death being just black, not seeing anything. Winter,
Yeah,
by being so white, is trying to talk to me. Ooh, maybe because it has all the light
yeah. It's not. It's not.
being white.
Right. It's not blind. He's not blind.
Hmm. It reflects all the light. That closing communicated to one who sees death as white worms riddling the apple of the eye. You have these white worms then
Yeah,
eating
that's
through the eyes.
the white of the sight that he's seeing.
Yeah, we sort of have this juxtaposition with how how we view death, and then by how we view death is how we live life. You think death comes at the cessation of touch. You are a flower bulb that can feel even in winter earth. Maybe you think that when you die you don't feel anything. You feel everything in life. I think when I die that I won't see anything. I see everything in life.
Mm. Yeah, because at the end they're like underground and it's in the white of winter. So he
Yeah, the
can see
winter of being alive.
right. So he can see everything and
Because winter is also the hardship, you know? So in
right.
the winter of being alive, like through this hardship of being alive, the ground of the living, the in the ground is where, the growing happens. That's where, you're planted into the ground, they're planted into the living in the winter of being alive.
So then I guess they'll bloom into death.
Okay,
They'll,
I become, we are becoming a bulb, almost like to combat that. I don't know. It's
yeah,
interesting. I mean, you can become pretty, you can get this sort of cosmic feeling sometimes, being in love. So
yeah,
Max Ritvo's a young man, educated. His mom was a research scientist. Um, came from a educated family, and he had a lot of feelings. He was a high emotions. He was young, he was in love, and he was dying.
he was, yeah.
And
But
thank
hey,
God for it, right?
I guess. Well, I guess we'll never know. I guess we'll never know what could have been. All we have is the poetry, which will live on. And some people might think that that is a form of heaven.
Hmm.
Your work being read and even discussed after your death. I mean,
Right, right.
so maybe Max Ritvo has reached some sort of echelon. I don't know, some sort of metaphysical Valhalla
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
in
Yeah.
this war of art.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know. But shout out to Max Ritvo. He's definitely got some definitely got a lot of people heaping praise upon him. You'll find no shortage of people willing to sing his praises. So
Yeah. And I mean, look, I'm not gonna say that Max Ritvo is a great poet, you know, like an all-time
hmm
great, but he is a poet. And I think it's good to read him, to be familiar with him for
hmm
this sort of current zeitgeist.
I think so too. Almost sort of know where you
Hmm.
stand.
Hmm. Hmm. Because like, yeah,
hmm And I mean, who knows? And but that was almost 8 years ago when his last book was published, right, in 2016.
well,
But
yeah, and his first, I think the last voicemails might have been published in 2017, I think,
hmm,
because that was after, four reincarnations.
okay, so we are getting in the 7, 8 years, since. So
Yeah,
I feel that he's definitely has his influence. I know he has his influence, his people that he's influenced out there. And
yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's good to read contemporary poetry to see, kind of, yeah, it's just good to read contemporary poetry, I
right,
think. Um,
like I said, see where you stand, see where other people
yeah,
stand, see what's
right,
sort of in circulation.
right, yeah. Um, and I mean, so much of the poetry, like we see like the greats, we see the best of the best.
hmm
So, it can kind of be tough to like compare, it's like, look, I've only listened to Mozart, okay? So I
And
don't know what,
we actually were just talking about how lucky we had been on this
hmm.
podcast.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like we were pretty much just reading like 10 out of 10s.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah. And I mean, there's probably some people who like, like they'll read Max Ritvo, and it might be a revelation to them, or
could
that,
be.
they might be like, whoa, this is, some mind-blowing stuff.
But hey, regardless of what we say or how we feel, there's something about the Max Ritfos, and even though he's different, just as far as being contemporary, the rupee cars, and
Hmm.
this is
Hmm.
the poetry that is in circulation and that is
Right.
out and
Yeah.
about,
Yeah. This is poetry that's being written now. That's.
being read or being produced now.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there's something there, unless you
Yep.
just unless you just throw the baby out with the bathwater, unless you just don't believe in, if you want, do you want to approach this with nihilism?
Right. Yeah.
What artist can really approach work with nihilism?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, even if like, you play music, if it was music, you couldn't just be like, the only people who made good music are all already dead. I mean, music's dead, Like,
Yeah,
why are you even doing,
or even
like,
or even like uh you play music, but who knows, like, the how things are going to be viewed, like, years down the line, or like, like, in in time, who knows how things are
hmm
going to be
hmm
viewed in
hmm
time,
Right.
so you know uh in some ways you just have to kind of just cast your rod and just see what you catch.
hmm hmm hmm
There's sort of that roll the dice element to it. But
Yeah.
yeah, man, Max Ritvo, I don't know, I'm kind of good. I'm kind of feel like I'm good. Check him out, check him out. All I can say is just read it for yourself and see where you land.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. I mean, for me, my final thoughts are, Max Ritbo, give him a read. His book for reincarnations, I think, is definitely worth just picking up and just kind of checking out and getting a feel for sort of his for his sort of imagery, his imaginative voice, and I, a big part of his story is that I think that is that he was a young poet who passed away too soon. And so I don't think you can't read his work as a finished product.
mm,
And in some ways, although Max Ritbo sort of is, kind of a finished product, that's sort of a dark way of looking at it, because
yeah,
he's come and gone, and he's passed away, but his work is shows all the potential of that life, I think that's kind of the the takeaway from Max Ritbo.
sounds good to me.
But
But yeah,
yeah,
hey,
hey, you know,
so yeah, Max Ritvo.
hey, I mean, if you enjoyed it, you like Max Ritbo, you want to hear about some other poets, check out our other
Right.
podcasts, our other videos. Stay tuned. We're gonna keep coming because next week we have who do we have next week? It's I think you it's one that you had suggested.
Is it? Let me see. Next week we have. Give me a second.
Sorry, I thought
Oh, we have Lee Bai.
yes,
Lee Bai
yes.
next week, and
So we're going somewhere completely different. We're going way
right,
back in the past next
right.
week,
We're gonna go from
in a different
contemporary to
culture. So
right
we went contemporary American this week, and then we're going
mid.
ancient,
Yeah,
uh,
ancient Chinese.
yeah, next week. So um, yeah,
You never know what you're gonna get on Verse Take.
right, right.
Tune in next time. I've been James,
I've been Justin, more or less.
and I guess we'll sign off. See you guys later. Take care. All right. Well, hey, that was that.
Nice.
Yes, sir.